Hey everybody, and welcome to what I think is episode
12.
11?
It's
12.
12, yes.
Episode 12. Yeah, see, I used to be odd numbers, but then we had the guest episode, and that threw the whole order out of whack, so now I'm
Right.
evens.
Yes.
12. Episode 12 of Fully Endorsed. I am Super DM64, and with me, as usual, is the man whose channel this is, Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir.
Hello, people of the internet, and guess what? Now we are at the exact same number of episodes as the subject of today's episode.
Very true, until they release more, which hopefully soon. I mean,
Yes. Well, maybe not so soon, because then it's going to make this video, out of date.
True, very true. But we are talking about a Netflix documentary series that's been around for 3 or 4 years now. It's something that I've been meaning to check out for ages, and then I finally did. And it's The Toys That Made Us, which is about toys. Specifically,
Who knew?
Specifically classic toys, a lot of 80s and 90s that sort of became the huge pop culture juggernauts that they are. I mean, you know, all the big ones, G.I. Joe, He-Man, Transformers, all the things that we love.
Right, the exact same stuff that you would see again and again parodied on Robot Chicken.
Right. All the stuff that got remade in the early 2000s and that we watched the remakes of and then checked out the original stuff later. So yeah, 12 episodes. I think it was originally only intended to be 8 episodes because
Right.
the theme song in the first 2 seasons is like, you know, it's 8 parts, and then the third season they're like,
an 8-part documentary series. Da, 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 da.
yeah. It's kind of like, you know, in Star Trek, where at first it was always like, this is our 5-year mission. And then eventually they were like, this is our continuing mission. So yeah. Andres.
Yes.
Initial thoughts, impressions. What did you think of this thing?
It definitely was much better than I had anticipated. I had heard about this series for quite a while, especially when it came to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles episode, which I heard, you know, plenty of good things about, for a particular reason. Well, I'm sure we'll get into when we cover season 3, but it was something that was always popped up under my recommendations at Netflix, and it was something that I heard a lot about, but it was just not a topic that I was really that into quite yet. I mean, I've always considered myself like not a hardcore toy collector, but, you know, being a fan of Godzilla, Power Rangers, Ultraman, I do, you know, giant robots. I do occasionally collect figures here and there, and I've always been interested in the evolution of toys as the years go by, especially when it came to Transformers. I never grew up with like the more blocky, rigid original G1, G2 Transformers, but I definitely saw the progression from like G1 to Beast Wars to Armada to the Bay toys to Masterpieces and all that stuff. And also, I like to familiarize myself with certain like toy lines like Rebel Tech, Soul of Chogokin, Robot Spirits, you know, Super Mini Pla, all that good stuff. You know, Bandai vinyl figures, and as well SH Monster Arts. So yeah, I do definitely consider.
Did you mention Shogun Warriors? And
I never grew up with Shogun Warriors, and what I am definitely familiar with them. In fact, I actually wrote an essay about the Shogun Warriors franchise for a upcoming anthology release from Wild Hunt Press. And so,
yeah, I never had one, obviously, but
right.
But everybody knows about them. Everybody's seen that ugly ass Godzilla.
Right. It's one of those like toys where it's like it's so ugly yet it's incredibly charming that, you know, it's garnered a lot of love from old school fans over the years.
It looks like it was based on one particular King of the Monsters poster that I've seen, where he had this really weird, like, smushed up face.
Mm-hmm. I'm surprised they haven't covered Shogun Warriors, but they kind of sort of did. They
mentioned them.
Yeah, they did.
In the Transformers episode, I think.
I believe it was the Power Rangers episode, because it was at that point Bandai was trying to get their toys out in America, but no one was familiar enough with those characters, and it wasn't until Power Rangers that they're like, okay, now we can start sending our robots over there.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, all those toys were Bandai. Meanwhile, Transformers was Takara, their rival. So going into the toys that made us, I wasn't expecting anything deep per se, but I was pleasantly surprised by how in depth they got into the histories of these toy lines, from their humble beginnings to their large successes, while at the same time kind of summarizing it and keeping it palatable for toy enthusiasts and just people who are just fans of the franchise in general, to appeal the masses. Getting enough information out there to intrigue audiences while also making giving it enough personality for the people who are just fans of those properties.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a very similar boat as you. I liked toys growing up, but it wasn't exactly and I knew things about, certain toy lines. I knew about all the big ones from the 80s and that whole wave of, like, cartoons based on toys, but I was always more into the cartoons than the toys themselves. Mostly because, the toys weren't really around anymore, but the cartoons you could still find. But by the time we were coming up.
Also, it's kind of funny how you and I, you and I are children of the 90s, and so that was around that time where they started making cartoons not to sell toys, but rather, like, the toys came out as the cartoons did not come out as a result of the toys. Whatever toys that did exist came out as a result of the cartoons. It's like Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken, Powerpuff Girls, Ren and Stimpy, SpongeBob, Rocko's Modern Life, Rugrats.
And I'm still salty that we never got, like, a really good Samurai Jack line. Oh, I would have killed for that.
But yeah,
those little robots, the evil robots from that one episode who, like, fold into, like, the little baskets. I would have loved to have a toy of that. Are you kidding me?
But yeah, it was a different time that we grew up in, but yet we still had some exposure to those older franchises, especially Transformers. And dear God, when 80s nostalgia hit the 21st century, it hit hard for us.
Well, Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and He-Man were, like, the three big ones that all had, like, huge revivals in the early 2000s. G.I. Joe tried. They really tried.
That's all we can say.
It just never happened.
I will say this, in covering, like, going into the G.I. Joe episode, it's funny how they try to end things on they try to end each episode on a positive note or on a hopeful note. But however, it's kind of weird for G.I. Joe, because if you look right now, it's like there's almost, like, I can guarantee there's practically nothing out there for G.I. Joe.
It's a dead franchise, right? Every so often they try. They're like, here's a new G.I. Joe show, and it just never takes off. Yeah. The movies were not good.
The second one tried, at least. It tried to at least look like G.I. Joe.
The second one did try, but I enjoy the first one more because it's, like, just dumb and, like, fun. And the second one is, like, they threw the Rock in there for no reason and they killed off most of the characters from the first movie. They didn't bring back Christopher Eccleston. Like, come on, man.
Hey, they got Bruce Willis.
Why?
He's the original Joe.
Okay. He is Joe.
He's Joe.
He's a 12-inch. The others are just the 6 inches from the 80s. That wasn't a penis joke. I realized that it came across as a penis joke, but it was actually.
Like, I was thinking of our version of Alan Moore. Oh, it's a euphemism for my penis.
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be. I've misunderstood, but so yeah, I went into this series. I was interested in the subject, but I didn't really know if it would grab me, and it really fucking surprised me. It really, I was hooked, like, almost immediately, and it's really fascinating. There's another series made by the same people called The Movies That Made Us. That's only got one season currently on Netflix, and I watched that immediately after watching this, and I thought, oh, this is going to be great because it's made by the same people, and also it's, like, more in my wheelhouse. I didn't enjoy it as much, and I think it was because it was in my wheelhouse. I already knew most of the things. Like, I already knew a lot of the information that was being presented to me, and so it wasn't as much fun as this was, as getting to discover like all this behind the scenes like intrigue. Right. Every episode is like, I created it. No, I created it.
Right. There's a lot of like cattiness, like back and forth, bantering, or at least the way they edited. I will get into this event later, but they do try to. The way they edit these interviews, they make it seem like the interviewees are interacting to each other, responding to each other. But it's very funny how, like, you see that a lot, where people are trying to claim the sole credit for creating a certain toy property. And it kind of goes to show you that, like, a lot of the best ideas out there are not made by one single individual. Usually it's more of a collaborative thing. You and I, Dylan, know that more than anyone when it comes to Draco Azul. How essentially, like, I was the guy who came up with the idea and the basic concept, and you helped me flesh out the design, introducing some ideas, intentionally or accidentally, to create the design that most of our followers or hardcore fans know and love? Who knows?
Yeah, and, like, it's and it would be easy if that's all that it was. Like, it would be easy if you had just come up with the idea and then sent it off to me and I drew it and we never actually talked about it. But it was weird because we would be on Skype during those drawing sessions and we would be like pitching ideas back and forth. And so it's this really blurry area where I don't know what I came up with and what you came up with.
Yeah. And eventually I'll just Bill finger you. Oh, that doesn't sound right. I misunderstood. I will Bob Kane you, and I will claim sole credit. It's mine. It's all mine.
So you made the operative mistake. You already credited me in the first issue. Bob Kane was a smarter thief than you. No. But yeah, there's a lot of that going on, especially in like the Barbie episode. That shit got vicious.
Yeah, that was fucking crazy. Like, the dude who designed the mechanics of Barbie ended up becoming this bachelor, drug-fueled sexaholic swinger dude who is like not good for the brand at fucking all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went into that episode thinking, and it's the second episode of the series too. I went into that episode like, oh, I'm not gonna I just watched the Star Wars episode, which was great. And I was like, oh, Barbie. Like, part of me was like, should I skip the Barbie episode? I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck about Barbie. I don't want to watch a 45-minute like documentary about the origins of Barbie. But it was really fascinating. There's a lot of intrigue and like a really interesting history that I wasn't aware of. The whole like Polish, was it Polish?
German. It was a German doll based on a German comic strip character who was essentially she wasn't a prostitute, but she was a super promiscuous character who was always seen flirting or like with people or like just like in the process of like the before sex or after sex or
could we call her a lady of the evening perhaps?
I don't know. It's like, is it a profession of hers or not? I don't know.
Yeah, and then there's like
I looked into it, and even on Wikipedia is like very vague on it.
And then there's like a tradition apparently where like dudes would like give these dolls to people as a way of being like, hey baby.
What do you think? Huh? You see this doll? You, me, and you. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, it's crazy to think, like, we grew up with these sort of toys back in the day, or for all our lives, and it's hard for us to imagine a time when something like Barbie dolls didn't exist. Like, I don't think, like, dolls in general exist, or if they did, they were probably, like, children or dolls or baby dolls, but not, like, dolls of actual women. And so the fact that the creator, or one of the co-creators, Ruth Handler, she had to go all the way to Germany to find inspiration to say, okay, I want to make something like that, but more appropriate for girls.
And it's one thing when we're talking about a brand like that, like, I'm obviously very consciously aware of the fact that, like, somebody had to come up with G.I. Joe, and somebody had to come up with the idea for, My Little Pony at some point, But, like, when you get into the Lego episode, that's a really weird one, because I never even thought about, like, Lego having a history. Like, Lego just seems so, elemental. Like it just
Yeah.
feels like Lego has always been there. It's like an element of the universe. You don't expect there to be a backstory for Lego, and then somebody goes like, "Oh, here's the history of Lego. They used to make wooden ducks," and you're like, "What?" Like,
Yeah, it started from like wooden ducks, and then like wooden bricks, and then like wood just became too much. It became too difficult to collect, so they switched over to plastic, and they made
they
like,
had
plastic.
multiple factory fires too, and that was the major thing that turned them off of wood.
And then fucking World War II happened, and it's like, well, fuck, what do we do now with these fucking Nazis all over us?
And so many interesting things I didn't know, like the fact that the blocks didn't actually lock together originally.
Right, because they didn't have the little tubes in the center.
Then they invented the tubes, and suddenly they had the system. And then and then the introduction of the Lego people. Like they didn't have the people at first; it was just the bricks, and then they introduced the people, and you're like, "Whoa, that was like
they couldn't fit in the car," which is like crazy to think nowadays, because now a lot of Lego is just vehicles for your Lego minifigures to sit in.
Yeah, that's that's the bulk of it, really. Nobody likes building like a skyscraper out of Legos. It's boring and it takes a long time. But like everybody's like, I want to build the fucking X-wing.
Right. That was the thing. It's like with the Lego stuff, it's like we don't want to do any tanks or stuff because they just got out of World War II. They want to be more like less violent driven, a less violent driven brand. But when Star Wars came, it's like fuck it. It's the sky's the limit in terms of like what they could or couldn't create once they started building ships like sci-fi ships and tanks.
Yeah, I wonder if the existence of Minecraft has affected like Lego's bottom line at all, because it sort of fills the same niche, and you don't have to buy like a bunch of expensive sets.
I guess kind of. You know what's really weird? I believe there actually is Lego Minecraft toys right now. Like an official collaboration.
That's fucking weird. That's like two totally different systems, and they're like integrating them. And then also another thing I didn't know, because obviously like Lego Star Wars was a thing like for my entire life.
Right.
So I never really realized that this was the thing. But for a long time, Lego was like, we will not make weapons.
Right.
We will not make. They would specifically like colored like when they originally brought out the Lego castle, they made the bricks yellow because they were afraid that if they made them gray, kids would build tanks out of them.
Right.
I'm like, fuck you, I'll build a yellow tank. Fuck you.
I hope they don't hit each other too hard with the Lego tanks.
Oh boy.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. Which is stupid, because I've seen some of the crazy shit that people do with like just regular ass Lego bricks. If somebody wants to make a gun out of Legos, they will make a fucking gun out of Legos. You can't stop them. That's the power of the system.
Right, yeah. That's another thing. Like in this series, there are lots of instances where there's like a reoccurring theme or a reoccurring like sort of like create memes within each episode. So they'll often make fun of that. So you were just mentioning
some characters sort of become memes within their episodes, and then because obviously a lot of these different properties belong to like the same companies, so like a lot of times you'll see those characters recur in later episodes.
Right.
Like you'll meet somebody in the Barbie episode, and then later on down the line when you're doing another Mattel property, like actually I think He-Man, the very next one, is also Mattel, then some of those characters will pop up again. And,
or when they were talking about like Ninja Turtles, they went back the man who designed the toys or like the guy who took the designs and then refined them into the final designs for the toys was the same dude from the He-Man episode. And he's like, right. And they showed stock footage. They're like, remember this guy? He's like, I created He-Man, motherfucker.
Yeah. The guy who was like, he needs to be bigger. Like, they're not muscly enough. Like that guy.
Yeah.
That guy was insane. He was just obsessed. He was just like fucking big muscles. Fucking like that's why. If you ever wonder why He-Man looks that way, it was this one dude's very particular fetish.
Well, that's the thing. Like he wanted to something that, obviously, like interestingly enough, it made total sense. He-Man was inspired by something like Conan the Barbarian and a lot of those. What's his name? Like Frank Zeta paintings of like barbarians and all that fantasy stuff. And Frank Franzetta. So he was inspired by that. It's like, we got to make our action figures make the G.I. Joes look like a bunch of wimps. So it's like, they got to put on the muscles. And another meme, bong, He-Man.
Yeah. That's such an interesting universe. That's what I like about that franchise, is that it's like you take Conan the Barbarian and like Lord of the Rings and like epic fantasy shit like that, and like throw it in a blender with like Star Wars,
right,
and like a bunch of other shit. Like, it's a fascinating world that they created for He-Man, and they created it completely whole cloth. Unlike some of the other things on this list. I mean, probably out of the big ones, that's the one that sort of the toy company is most responsible for creating, because G.I. Joe was just modeled after
real army men back in the day when it first came out.
Right, real people. And then like Transformers, that's a whole story that we're definitely going to talk about.
Right.
That was a whole bunch of like things influencing each other. And then like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came from the comic book.
Yeah.
Barbie came from a German thing. Star Wars came from Star Wars. Like most of the things on here were like adapted from something else. He-Man is the one that really stands out in my mind, where it was like, we fucking created this shit. This is our shit.
That's very true. Yeah. And that pretty much set the standard for a lot of toy companies from there on out, where it's like we make a product, and then we create a bunch of other stuff solely to advertise the product. They made the comics, they made especially the cartoon show, to advertise the toys, because I guess you could do that back in the 80s. It was pretty rampant. I mean, you can say Ninja Turtles and Transformers did that to a degree, but it's like G.I. Joe was made from the ground up as a toy. And then everything else came afterwards. Also, it's very funny how there was that one dude within the He-Man team who kind of bullshitted a lot of their plans, where it's like, I don't know, it's just a toy. What are we gonna do? We'll make a comic book. Oh, you got a comic book? Yeah, we got a comic book. And then after the meeting,
somebody get Marvel on the phone right now.
Yeah, fuck, we need a comic. It reminds me of this story. Are you familiar with Ralph? Are you familiar with Ralph Bakshi?
Yes, I have seen. Unfortunately, I have seen his Lord of the Rings, and I am familiar with his career. I haven't seen. I think his Lord of the Rings is the only movie of his that I've actually watched.
Okay. Maybe I might. I might introduce maybe something for this show of his. Okay, are you familiar?
But I'm familiar with his oeuvre, though. Yeah.
Are you familiar? Do you know his Mighty Mouse story?
No, I don't know his Mighty Mouse story. No.
Okay, so so back in the day, he was trying to pitch a bunch of TV series for a certain company, TV station, for him to create and animate with his team. And they're each pitch he threw at them, they rejected. And so out of desperation, he's like, Mighty Mouse! I got the rights to Mighty Mouse! Yeah, it's which was an old cartoon from Terry Toons that he used to work on back in the day. And so the TV stations were like, oh yeah, Mighty Mouse, that's a thing we remembered from back then. All right, if you got the rights to Mighty Mouse, then we'll accept your proposal. And then after the meeting, he's like,
I am familiar with Mighty Mouse as a character.
Okay. So after the meeting, he would talk to his assistant, somebody get me the rights to Mighty Mouse. And then that's how the New Adventures of Mighty Mouse ended up becoming a thing in the late 80s.
Very interesting.
Yeah. But anyways, go back to the toys that made us. Yeah, it's funny because well, what do you got? We got a comic book. Okay, do you got anything else? Because kids don't fucking read. You got a cartoon series happening. And then after that, it's we gotta get on this shit right now. So it's interesting how they sort of flying. What's the phrase? Flying by the seat of their pants, or just trying to faking it till they make it, sort of deal.
Oh, they definitely faked it till they made it.
It's also it's interesting trying to also quite inspirational as well. Just these people have these brand new ideas, and a lot of people around them are like, it's never gonna work. Barbie toys, that's not gonna work. He-Man, that's not gonna work. Ninja Turtles, that's certainly not gonna work. Power Rangers, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, that was I didn't know about the long history of people trying and failing to bring Sentai to America before Saban finally managed to pull it off. Like Stan Lee tried to do it at one point.
Right.
Like this was apparently a whole saga that I was unfamiliar with.
Right. It's crazy to think that we could have almost gotten Chodenshi Bioman as our first like Power Rangers back in the day, or like what was it called? Taiyo Sentai Sun Vulcan. Just like,
yeah, it would have been produced by Stan Lee, and there would have been like Marvel tie-in books. Like it would have been a whole different like universe.
Yeah. Imagine being in that timeline. It's also very surprising, like how Power Rangers. It's such a amazing idea that so fits in you and I's like what do you call it? It fits in our It suits to our liking. It fits to our taste in entertainment. You and I, we like giant monsters, we like superheroes, we like giant robots, and Power Rangers provides all of that. So it's crazy to think that every single one of those like pompous idiots back in the day thought, no, poppycock, it's too silly. It's, Power Rangers, it's this silly Sentai stuff can never work in America. It's like, motherfucker, do you know how popular, how cool this shit is?
It's like, I dig giant robots, you dig giant robots, chicks dig giant robots.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and obviously, kids of the 90s like you and I, we proved those fuckers wrong. And that's just to go on a slight tangent. It's like, I never understood why people always consider Power Rangers to be okay. I do understand why Power Rangers, especially the Mighty Morphin era, was really, really silly. It was, absolutely written to be a super corny show. But it's like, sure. I'm not sure why people look down on the very concept of Power Rangers as a whole.
Yeah, it doesn't strike me as, like, if you're already into, like, superheroes.
Yeah.
And, like, Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just sort of combine those two things.
And Voltron.
And Voltron. It's just a combination of things that had already worked previously. So I don't understand why combining those things would make it suddenly unfeasible.
Very true, yeah.
Like, I totally understand and why people were hesitant to jump on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles bandwagon, because that was a completely original and really weird idea.
Mm-hmm.
But with Power Rangers, yeah, it's just like, hey, here's 3 things that we know people like. What if we do them all at once? And they were like, that could never work. Harumph.
Right. It's also kind of like that. I can also see that, people look down on tokusatsu effects in general. You and I, we appreciate the art of, suitmation and model building, and, you and I have a large, suspension of disbelief. When we see, the Showa Godzilla movies, yes, it's obvious that it's a guy in a suit, but you and I appreciate the craft put into that suit and the performance, and we're able to let our imagination sort of fill in the blanks for that sort of stuff.
And there's also a curve. There's some movies pull it off way better than others.
True.
Something like Daimajin or Terror of Mechagodzilla looks like a million miles away from, I don't know, Godzilla versus Megalon or
Gamera Super Monster.
Or even the original Ultraman, because it was on TV and it had no budget. And it looks like it.
And this Power Rangers was definitely a product of that time, where it's like, it's not a movie where you have a larger budget. You gotta spread that budget thinly across God knows how many, roughly 50 episodes a season. So obviously the effects within those Sentai shows are not going to look as good as a single Godzilla film by comparison.
One of the interesting things about when I finally checked out Jew Ranger, I was actually surprised how high the production values were on that show. There are a lot of great effects stuff in that show that had to get cut out because the people weren't in suits.
Yeah. It's a shame that's people look down on that. It's like, you were watching the exact same footage those people at Saban or the Fox Network were looking at, and what you saw was a very impressive show for its era. They saw it as fake, cheap, and shitty looking. And that's always been the uphill battle for tokusatsu to go through. And I definitely appreciate, within the Power Rangers episode, they went over the basic general history, and they gave a respectful amount of time explaining the history of Japanese televised superheroes that eventually led to Jew Ranger and eventually Power Rangers.
It also helped that we had already had the Transformers episode prior to that, and they had already sort of established sort of the whole Japanese robot craze that had gone on for the better part of the 20th century.
Yeah. What was also crazy? Sorry, go ahead.
No, so I mean that they had already provided a lot of context, and so they just had to go back. Like literally, they opened the Power Rangers episode with being like, "So Godzilla happened," and then
no. It started with Chalk happened.
Right.
Because remember, Bandai of America did not sell any of the toys Bandai of Japan did. So the most successful toy of theirs prior to 1993 was Chalk.
It was good chalk, Andres. It was.
I know. I played with that chalk back in those days.
It was good chalk. Or so the lady says.
It was a high quality chalk, my friend.
I wasn't much of a chalk kid, but I'll take their word for it.
Within the Power Rangers episode, they were interviewing this one dude named Scott Zillner. You probably know him because he was the guy with the nice mustache, the curly mustache. And I saw him. I was like, wait a minute, I've seen this guy on Facebook. And it just so happens I'm Facebook friends with Scott Zillner, and it's like, oh shit.
Oh, and yeah, what does this guy do? What is his?
He was listed as what's it called, like the manager of Power Morphicon, or like he's like someone who is like in charge of he's in charge or some like organizer for Power Morphicon. And I'm looking at Facebook right now and showing that he's the owner of Planet X Toys, which I'm assuming is like, like an indie toy distributor or toy manufacturer thing. But yeah, looking at his like list of accomplishments: owner at Planet X Toys, co-owner of Simi Valley Toy and Comic Fest. He works at a Megabit Game Expo. He works at Troublemaker Service. Owner and founder of Toy Wizards, which I think that's also the He-Man thing they talked about. Maybe not. Maybe that's another thing. Co-owner of ToonCon. Owner and founder of Japan World Heroes. Yeah, so this guy is definitely a guy who has worked in a lot of toy businesses and expos and convention stuff. In other words, he is the exact opposite kind of person that JD Lee's is.
What you're saying is he's a big nerd like us.
But a big successful nerd who makes things for other nerds to enjoy.
Unlike us.
Unlike JD Lee's. So if anyone knows what I'm talking about, just look at the stupid G-Fest Twitter account and you'll see what I mean. Anyways,
did you see where Larry Quatch is officially not going?
Yes, I did, and John Bellotti Jr. as well. I might be pulling out as well. I don't know.
I have a feeling the whole thing's going to get canceled. As much as JD Lee's will refuse, there's going to come a point where he's going to have to give in.
It's like that one shot from what was it, from Naked Gun. It's like, it's okay, go home. There's nothing to see here. Meanwhile, there's like a bunch of fireworks and explosions and people running around out on fire.
Yeah.
Anyways, G-Fest falling apart aside. Power Rangers, yeah. So it was really cool to see that guy that I recognized from social media on there. I was surprised that they didn't show a whole lot of Andre from Black Nerd Comedy on YouTube. In fact, there's a lot of points in this documentary series where they have like super fans being interviewed, just talking about their experiences with those toys. But
I was really fascinated when he popped up. I think he only pops up in the third season, right?
Yeah, he only popped up in the third season to talk about Ninja Turtles and Power Rangers, but it's like they barely show him. And as well as they barely show any of the super fans unless they have a massive warehouse of collectibles, at which point they'll give them, a little more time to shine. But I do appreciate that. I do like that they focused more on the people who made the toys as opposed to the people the toys made.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was very interesting.
It's like it was something that like my friend Matt Burkett from Monstrosities was talking about in a recent video of his, talking about where are all the tokusatsu experts, like the next generation of tokusatsu experts, because nowadays it seems like a lot of super fans with a big enough following are treated like royalty within the fandom, to the point where they are given a high enough position to be doing commentaries, official commentaries, and hosting official Shout Factory sponsored backed podcasts, live streams, when they really don't have enough of the not technical know-how, enough of they don't know, they're not as well versed in the world and history and the craft of all these stuff. So it's like, for here, I'm glad that they didn't show off too much of the super fans, rather just focusing on like they spent the meat and potatoes of this documentary focusing on the very people who made these products.
Yeah, I think that's necessary because, like we were saying before, everybody, I saw a documentary once about Back to the Future that was very good, but it wasn't about the making of the movie.
Oh.
It was about the fan culture.
Oh no! It's like I can, to be honest, I can only like stand so much of just nerds saying, "Oh my god, Back to the Future! It's so awesome! Oh my god!"
Yeah, true. But this was actually pretty well done, and then like they went into like this whole circuit of like dudes who build their own DeLoreans. Like it was pretty fascinating stuff.
I hope it was more interesting than the Ultra 7 panel at G-Fest, where it's like half the panel was spent on this one dude who made a recreation of the car from Ultra 7. I swear to God, that's how most of the panel went down for Ultra 7.
Oh boy. And then what was I saying?
Back to the Future documentary.
Right.
More focus on the fans, less so on the people behind the movie.
Yeah, and you can get away with that for Back to the Future because everybody knows about Back to the Future. Everybody knows how that movie was made. We've got the DVDs and the Blu-rays. We've seen the special features. Everybody knows the history of Back to the Future. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of get away with like doing. They've done the same thing with Star Trek. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of documentary material out there, all about like Star Trek and the creation of Star Trek and Star Trek.
Wasn't there like a documentary called Trekkies about the fan culture of Star Trek?
That's what I was about to say. There are multiple documentaries that go into that side of it.
Okay.
So yeah, they've done the same thing with Star Trek. And like I said, you can kind of get away with that because people know the history. This is different.
Yeah,
everybody knows these toys, but not everybody knows,
the story behind the toys.
Yeah, and so I feel like you kind of have to. It would be one thing if there were a million other documentary series just like this one, but this is pretty unique at the moment, and so I think it's very nice that they go into giving all this backstory when it would have been so much easier and required so much less research to just be like fangirling for 45 minutes about how much they love Hello Kitty.
Yeah. What was it? Yeah, Hello Kitty was another interesting one. Like, Hello Kitty and Transformers were very interesting in that they focused a lot on the Japanese culture surrounding those two properties. Like, with Transformers, they focus a lot on the history of, robot toys, which it was super intriguing to know that Hasbro created G.I. Joe, which was then turned into Henshin Cyborg for Takara.
Oh yeah, this blew my fucking mind. So the original G.I. Joes from the 60s, they were used by the Japanese, the modeled after, like, their molds for their bodies were used to create the Henshin Cyborg line, which winds up morphing over time into what eventually became Transformers. So Hasbro creates the thing that inspires the thing that inspires their thing later on. It's weird.
It's almost incestuous if you think about it.
It's you can't really call Transformers is not a Japanese product that was Americanized, like Power Rangers or Digimon. Uh-huh. It is very much half and half. It's a Japanese American product. It's fascinating all the way down to its DNA. It starts with G.I. Joe in the 60s, if you can believe that, and then like the whole robot craze that was going on in Japan at the same time, and then they sort of cross streams.
Very true. It was also cool that they were checking, like, with not only with Transformers, but also Power Rangers. They kind of switched back and forth to look at the American and Japanese perspectives, seeing, like, the guys who invented these toys in Japan, how they reacted to the success in America. And that was very interesting.
It was so sad. It was so sad in the Power Rangers episode when they eventually like stopped repackaging the Japanese toys and just started producing their own. And like you cut back to that guy who had been designing all the Power Rangers toys, and he's just sitting there holding his little dragon dagger, like, oh, okay.
Okay, I guess it's like I'm glad they covered that, because it's like as time went on, the Power Ranger toys became cheaper and far lesser in quality compared to the Japanese Sentai toys. The Megazords and all the weapons became smaller. They didn't use any die-cast metal. It was all cheaper plastic. I had so much nostalgia when they brought up those, because I had one of these. I forget what they call them, but the ones that like had the heads that flipped. Like it would be the human, I have those too.
Yeah, I had the black one, and also maybe the blue one.
Yeah.
Although the blue one I think was actually like a turbo one, and the black one that I had was a Mighty Morphin one. But yeah, I had some of those, and like it was just it was like one of the only moments in this entire documentary series where like something that I actually owned popped up on the screen. I was like,
when they showed off those original like 6 Power Ranger figures, I actually owned the red one, the one with like the original big toys that didn't have the flip head gimmick. So I had the flip head gimmick once, and I had the original non-flip head ones. What was it? Oh, of course I had the Meg. Well, the funny thing is, my first Megazord that could combine was not the original. I never owned the original Megazord or Thunderzord until years afterwards, when the 2012 the Legacy line came out in the 2010s. But rather, I had the Shogun's Megazord. But seeing the toys all my life, it was really cool just seeing the Megazord itself there. And yeah, it's also interesting just seeing them like kind of talking about like the inspirations for these toys, and like just fun, great seeing like the people who were interested in bringing these toys over to America. It's like, wow, they saw potential. They saw what we saw as kids. Also, funny enough, with the Transformers, it's funny. Like, this is the exact same reaction I had when I first discovered G1 Transformers, when the Japanese were like, "Why'd you make the gun into the main bad guy? That's not cool."
Yeah, he was a good guy. Like, apparently a lot of the characters got flipped.
Right.
Like, Bumblebee was a bad guy.
Yeah.
Apparently the only one who stayed consistent was Optimus Prime. He was always apparently a good guy, but the rest of them got all flipped around. That was fascinating. It's little details like that that really make this worth watching. Or like in the G.I. Joe episode where they reveal, where you find out like, oh, Cobra wasn't always a thing.
Right, it's like...
That sort of got invented for the comic. They were like, hey, we need a villain. And they were the Hasbro was like, a villain? What do you mean?
It's like, who are they going to fight? Well, I'm sure the kids will make the G.I. Joes fight the other toys.
And like, they never even thought about that, because G.I. Joe started in the 60s, and back then you just assumed that they were killing Koreans or whatever. So it was like, you know...
Also, it's like, this was back in the day where it's like, villain toys I'm not sure if they talked about this in the G.I. Joe episode or the He-Man episode, where they mentioned that it's like, back in those days, villain toys did not sell. And it's crazy to think that when you think of like Skeletor, Shredder, Cobra Commander, Megatron, it's like such a different world back in those days.
I always loved villain toys more because they always had way cooler designs.
Mm-hmm.
And you gotta have both. You gotta have the villain toys so that you get something to smash into your hero toys.
Also, crazy enough.
In a gesture that you know means that they're fighting, but could also be interpreted as them fucking. So it's very confusing.
Just look at I'm now thinking of that one Family Guy clip of the Rock simulating sex by smashing like Peter and Lois dolls together.
Yeah. Or Spaceballs when Rick Moranis has the little toys and he's playing. Lord Helmet, your helmet is so big.
It's like, you didn't see anything, right? No, I didn't see you play with your toy, sir.
Yeah.
Another thing,
there's another big thing in the G.I. Joe episode.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and this was something I did already know before watching this show. G.I. Joe is very important to the history of toys because they invented the phrase action figure as a marketing gimmick, basically, to distract people from the fact that they were dolls. Like, boys didn't want to play with dolls, so they had to be like, no, young child.
You misunderstood.
this is an action figure. And the boy would go, oh, and then, that's how that happened.
Right. They pretty much changed, like with Barbie, they changed the game for the boys market. And it's also very interesting, like, that's another thing. They're always constantly, like, when it came to any of these toys, they're always wondering, will this work for boys? Will this work for girls? Or, like, will this be, like, a thing for families, for both genders? Or for both sexes, I guess, not to offend anybody out there. But I do wonder, do people still work along, when they're designing toys, are they still thinking about boy audiences and girl audiences? Because I know, there's
I think so. I think sometimes they get surprised, like with the whole brony phenomenon.
Yeah,
but
well, I'm sure there's girls out there who like Star Wars and Transformers and Ninja Turtles, and obviously
absolutely,
there's guys out there who definitely like My Little Pony, and I'm sure there are guys out there that like Barbie as well. But we live in an era where we don't want to shame others for liking stuff that wasn't, quote unquote, made for them. So
right.
I do wonder, though, a lot of people are like, why does there have, I've sure heard people over the years saying, why does there have to be a boy section? Why does there have to be a girl section? Why can't they like what they choose? But I do wonder, it's like, does the toy company still draw us a line in the sand and say, we're designing this for boys, we're designing this for girls?
Yeah, well, the other thing, though, is that you got to remember, the vast majority of boys are going to play with, like, action figures, and the vast majority of girls are going to play with, I don't know, dolls or whatever. I don't fucking know.
Yeah, I guess it all depends on how you raise them, because, like, in our society, we condition our children to like certain things. We kind of push them into saying, pink and pastel, that's for us, that's for girls. Like, darker colors, blues, blacks, greens, that's for boys. So it's like society is conditioning people to like certain things.
I think that's true to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I think there's also a little bit of there's some nature in with that nurture as well. It's a complicated thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's, I don't know. It's a good question, but yeah, they're always going to like cater certain lines to certain audiences because that's how business is done. And then if another audience winds up liking it as well, then that's just an added bonus.
True. Yeah.
It was really interesting seeing sort of the competition in some of these toy companies between like the female divisions and the male divisions. Like
yeah.
Mattel had been selling Barbies for like 30 years when He-Man came along, and suddenly Barbie wasn't the hottest selling thing from Mattel anymore. And there was like a little bit of resentment from the female division at Mattel because all of a sudden the boys were making all the money. And then you had sort of a similar situation at Hasbro where it's like G.I. Joe was raking in all this coin, and then the women had to come up with something of their own, and they wind up creating, My Little Pony.
Right. And it's like funny how like
and the creation of She-Ra.
Yeah.
The creation of She-Ra, because the women at Mattel just couldn't leave well enough alone. They were like, we got to get in on this action.
And they're like, we can't have She-Ra be taller than He-Man.
Yeah.
It'll make us feel very self-conscious about our size.
I always wondered, if you were a kid in the 80s and you had those toys, how weird would it have been to actually play with your He-Man with your She-Ra? Because they look nothing alike. No. Like, the toys' designs are, like, vastly different. Yeah.
I'm surprised they never got into that, where it's like, I think they mentioned in G.I. Joe how they sort of just made one single design and just kind of sort of copy and pasted for all the other G.I. Joe characters, but I'm surprised they didn't talk about that for He-Man, because it's literally the exact same body for the majority of those He-Man figures. Yeah,
that's why Prince Adam is so swole, when it should be more like in the 2002 series where he's like a skinny fuck and then he transforms into He-Man. Like, that makes so much more sense, don't you think?
Right.
But in the original series, it's like, how does nobody know, like, that you're not, it's not even like a Clark Kent situation. You don't have glasses. You just take off your shirt and get a little tanner, and for some reason...
That's all it takes.
No, that can't be Prince Adam. You'd never catch him wearing S&M gear.
He don't swing that way.
Although the pink jacket, fabulous secret powers were revealed to me.
Back to the whole like boys versus girls mentality, boys club, girls club mentality. it's really funny when it's like they try to bring in men to design toys for the girls line. And in certain cases, like with the My Little Pony thing, you know, they had this dude who was like the least feminine dude ever, who was used to designing boys' toys, like designing like a doll houses for My Little Pony. And he was able to slowly but surely understand the complications, the intricacies of designing toys that would appeal to girls. Meanwhile, you have dudes who created this like Barbie. It was like, I forgot what it was called, but it wasn't a Barbie, but it was like a toy where like you Barbie toy where like you spin the arm and the girl grows breasts, so it's like, oh, she's growing up, and I'm thinking, what the absolute fuck?
I think that was part of the Barbie line, but it was like a spinoff. Yeah, they've tried a lot of different things with Barbie over the years, and a lot of times it doesn't go over well. I was surprised they didn't bring it up in the episode, but there was a very famous Barbie who was pregnant. And that was like a big no-no. That caused a lot of controversy back in the day. I kept waiting for them to mention that one in the episode, and I don't think they ever did. I was surprised.
But I was shocked by like the whole like the puberty doll thing. And also I gotta say, like, my sister, she was like heavily into Barbies. Like she was into Barbies, Hello Kitty, and Powerpuff Girls. And so seeing a lot of like the Hello Kitty stuff, but especially the Barbie stuff, like when they got to the 90s, I was like, I remember those commercials. I remember my sister playing with those exact dolls.
Yeah. You know, they create a puberty Barbie so that she can grow breasts, and yet poor Ken, they still don't do anything for Ken.
Oh God.
Where's puberty Ken, where you spin the fucking arm around?
His bulge grows.
And he grows 3 sizes that day.
Let's see. Like,
we're on the subject of the whole like gender thing as it corresponds to these toys. You could accuse the series of being a little bit unbalanced. There's like one girly episode per season.
Right. That is very true. Yeah, it's a very male or very masculine dominated series.
Oh yeah, you got fucking Power Rangers and WWE, brother. And then it's like every season there's like, and then every season they're like, and here's Hello Kitty. I guarantee you, when they get around to doing a 4th season, it'll be like one episode will be Care Bears, because you know that's coming, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe Cabbage Patch Kids, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. It depends. It's like, you know, it really has to depend on like whether or not there's an interesting story to tell right there. Let's see.
I really wonder what they'll do for our next season, honestly, because they've covered most of the biggies.
I know this
is a pretty impressive list that they've already done so far.
True. Yeah, they definitely got a lot of the toy lines down. That like a lot, even like I was talking about this series with my Japanese students, adult Japanese students, and you know they are familiar with stuff like Barbie, Lego, Star Wars, Hello Kitty, but they definitely are not familiar with G.I. Joe or He-Man. Like stuff like that is just not popular in Japan, or it's not in the public consciousness of Japan. But still, it's interesting.
The American military isn't popular in Japan? I can't believe it.
Have you seen Shin Godzilla? No.
But they know about Snake Eyes? They'd love him. I love how the whole origin story for Snake Eyes was we saved money by not painting this one.
Right. It's like we need to have 8 figures. We don't have enough money to make an 8th figure, so let's just take a basic mold and just not paint him.
It'll just be pure black, and they're like, oh, that's not going to sell, and then he became the most popular one.
Right. What was it?
Everybody loves Snake Eyes.
One thing it's also interesting is like when they're switching from toy line to toy line, where it's like with He-Man. I was not aware of this, but apparently they produced so many like secondary characters that they had long since stopped making He-Man and Skeletor toys. So it's like less and less kids were buying He-Man because they couldn't get the original characters they wanted to get. It's like
it's because whenever a He-Man or a Skeletor would hit the shelves, people would buy them up because they were the more popular characters, and nobody wanted Snout Spout or, Stinkor or God. There's so many. The list of He-Man characters is long and ridiculous, my friend. I have an entire book, an encyclopedic book of just characters and shit from that franchise, and it's
Wow.
it's a chunky book. Let me just say, they came up with a lot of shit.
It's also kind of fun. Like, yeah, it's crazy. It's like having a Transformers line, but like there's no Optimus or Megatron. Wait a minute. Speaking of that, in the Transformers line, it was I'm glad
that poor guy at Marvel who had to come up with names for all these Transformers.
Yeah.
And like at first they gave him a list of like 20 or whatever, and I was like, fine. But then like over the years, it must have just been so difficult.
Right. It's also interesting, yeah, they talked about Transformers the movie, and it's like, alright, this movie is essentially us wiping the slate clean, getting rid of all the toys, because we're not going to sell them anymore, and here are the new characters, the new toys, and everyone's like, what the fuck are you doing? And
it was very interesting to learn, though, that Optimus Prime's name came from Denny O'Neil, which is a name that I knew, and if you're familiar with like comic books, you know that name, because he did an initial pitch for the Transformers line that they didn't use any of his ideas, but they did keep the name Optimus Prime. So while that other guy came up with all the other names, Optimus was Denny's name.
Okay. I wasn't aware of I've heard the name Denny O'Neil before, but I've definitely heard Jim Shooter before. I know he was a big guy at Marvel for a while. He ran the fucking thing. One thing I really liked was Peter Cullen, when he was interviewed, he shared this story, which maybe he shared before, about how when it came to providing the voice of Optimus Prime, he was inspired by his own brother, who I believe was in the Army or the Navy, and his brother told him, if you're going to be a hero, be a real hero, not a big hotshot, fake action hero. You got to be very warm, very welcoming. You got to make someone a character that the kids will look up to, and it was a very touching moment there.
Be a real American hero, but that's the other toy line.
But yeah, it was fun. It was interesting because Optimus Prime had always been, with the exception of the movie Optimus, most versions of Optimus had always been a very warm, fatherly figure for generations of kids, and so it only makes it more interesting that Peter Cullen would voice this weird ass version of Optimus in the live action movies, where he's essentially
Are you suggesting that Murder Hobo Optimus is not accurate to the lore?
Give me your fucking face. No, Optimus! Boom!
Sentinel Prime is literally like, no, Optimus, don't kill me.
Fuck you.
Oh Jesus.
Another one of my favorite moment from the whole series so far is the reuniting of Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. Where
that was a big thing. Yeah,
that was the thing I heard people talking about. And this was the thing that got my attention for the Toys That Made Us, where Eastman and Laird, they split apart over creative differences with how to pursue the franchise. At first, I thought the story was that one guy was all into selling out and the other guy wasn't into selling out, but that wasn't it at all. Surprisingly for me, it was more along the lines.
Wasn't it when they introduced the female turtle in that live action show that one of them was like, "All right, I'm out."
It was one of those. That was one of it, right? But it's like later on. I think it was around the time of the 2003 era, where it's like, I think it was Kevin Eastman, he was done with Ninja Turtles and he wanted to get rid of it and move on to other things, while Peter Laird, he wanted to continue with Ninja Turtles and pass it off to the people who would make the 2003 series.
He's like, I'm going to ride this wave, are you kidding me?
At least I think that's how it was presented. And eventually, Eastman, he got back on board with the franchise with the Nickelodeon 2009 series, or 2012 series. And later, he started working with IDW on the IDW comics. And actually, that's when I met Kevin Eastman in person in San Diego, because IDW is stationed in San Diego. So I got the chance to meet him in person when they opened up a little comic museum showing off all of the original artwork throughout Ninja Turtle comic history. I didn't know there was that significant of an age gap between Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. I wasn't aware that Peter Laird was
he's an older fella, and the other one, I always forget which one is which, but one of them is an older fella, and the other one is quite a bit younger than him. Yeah,
right. I'm checking right now. Peter Laird is 66, and Kevin Eastman is 57. So there's almost a 10-year gap between the two of them. And so, like, it seemed like Peter Laird, he was that guy who was like, you know what, I'm gonna ride this wave. You know, I'm an older guy. I'm fine settling down with Ninja Turtles. Meanwhile, Kevin Eastman, he's much younger. He's like, I want to go out and do other things. Maybe, I'm not sure. Again, that's what the documentary is telling us, and I know documentaries have a habit of skewing the facts here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really great.
What's his name? That YouTuber, Quentin Reviews, recently did a video titled "How Documentaries Lie to You."
Exactly.
It's I didn't know that there was that much of an age difference between them at all prior to this. And at first that kind of took me by surprise, but then the more I thought about it watching the episode, I was like, you and I collaborate with people that are older than us, like it's fine,
right? Of course, yeah.
And it's a little weirder for them because they existed pre-internet, so I was like, how did they even meet? But
I think it was like, what was it, a comic store or something where they met?
They mentioned it.
Yeah, it's like they met by like pure happenstance. It's like, hey, you want to come over to my house and check out my Jack Kirby collection?
And the other one's like, I don't know if that's a come on, but okay.
But yeah, it was incredibly heartwarming to see these guys. It's one of those situations where it's like when you stop talking to someone for so long, so much time had passed to where it's like you want to get reconnected with them, but there's that part of you. It's like, it's been too long. What if the other person's not interested in talking to me anymore? Maybe it's best just to leave it alone. And but then they got back to, the Toys That Made Us organized a little meeting between the two of them, and they see each other, they handshake, they hug, they're drawing together for the first time in ages, they're reminiscing over the history of their accomplishments. It was like a truly special moment between two guys. You can tell, like, despite the fact that so much time had passed between them, you can tell the spark of friendship is still there between them.
Yeah, that was great. The other thing that was really fascinating about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles episode in particular was, and this is something that I already knew a little bit about, but it's always fascinated me, is how much the toy line and the cartoon sort of influenced what was already there in the comics, and what we know to be Ninja Turtles today is like a mixture of all those things. Like, originally in the comics they all wore the same color headband, and like they didn't have the distinct personalities that they were given for the cartoon.
Shredder was killed off in the first issue because
they killed Shredder immediately.
They thought it was just going to be a one and done stupid project.
Right, they killed off Shredder immediately.
Yeah, they didn't know they didn't know they were going to have like that big of a run, that long of a run.
Also, it was very interesting. I found learning about the history of the Fugitoid, that they had originally pitched Fugitoid to be its own comic, and nobody picked it up, and then they wound up using him as a character in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And if you grew up on the 2002 show, like I did, the Fugitoid is a big deal.
Right, I don't think I'm not sure if the Fugitoid ever appeared in the original series, because it's been forever since I watched it. But the 2002
show is actually much closer, like plot wise, to the to the comic than the original series is. Yeah. In a lot of ways, like they introduced the Triceratons and they introduced the Fugitoid. Like, I mean, there are all obviously major differences. Shredder is around for more than one episode.
I read a good chunk of the comics back in the day. I believe I read all the original comics from the very first issue all the way to maybe when the Turtles went into hiding, which was adapted into the movie. And I remember there was a part where they did deal with the Fugitoid, where the Ninja Turtles were accidentally transported to another world, an alien world, by the Utrons, and so they ended up having to deal with the Fugitoid helping him out, and that was a whole other crazy story right there. So it's just sort of like a side adventure that became its own story arc within the comics. Let's see. I'm looking at the stuff that we haven't talked about a lot. With Star Wars was interesting because it's like it mentioned like they talked to George Lucas and he declined to for interview, which I thought was a bit interesting. And Star Wars.
I think he's sick of being interviewed. I think he's sick of being in documentaries. He's just tired of it.
Maybe he knew that they were gonna bash on the prequels. He's like, I don't want you to talk about my movies that way. I think you guys are going too far in a few places.
But the toys sold well. I remember those days. I had a bunch of prequel toys.
It's super funny. Like, within the Star Wars thing, again, they end things on a happy note. With Star Wars, it's like, oh, new movies, new toys, Star Wars is bigger than ever. Yet, if you look at all the headlines today, none of the new Star Wars toys are selling right now. Like, it's funny, what they were talking about with
season 1 of this show, though, aired in, 2016? 17?
December 2017, yeah. So this was the year that Last Jedi came out. So
right. So Last Jedi was on the horizon. It hadn't come out, and
people weren't angry over it.
It wasn't a huge controversy yet. People were looking forward to it.
Right.
Rogue One and Force Awakens had done very well. 2015 to 2017 is a very
profitable year.
Profitable, and also just what's the word I'm looking for?
Swell.
Gee whiz, no. It was a very shit. I'm having trouble thinking of words tonight. Optimistic time,
yes,
for Star Wars, and that reflects in the episode, and it's funny now because of where we've ended up.
Because, like, they mentioned, like, within the new prequel trilogy, they were expecting, the prequels to be as popular as the original trilogy, so they made a boatload of toys. They made a boatload of toys that did not sell, No one wanted to buy a toy of Jar Jar Binks or Mace Windu or Dexter Jetster. I bet you they made a toy of Dexter Jetster.
But I think they did start to see returns on that as those of us who grew up with the prequels were getting older, right? Because originally it was like people who knew the original films going to see the movie and being like, this is fucking bad. But then, like, there were a bunch of baby children who wound up, buying a whole lot of Darth Maul shit. So,
so it's funny, like, they mentioned, like, they made a surplus of prequel toys, and the majority of them at the time did not sell and went to the bin market. I mean, and nowadays, you look at the Star Wars toys, there are tons of Rose Tico, Jyn Erso, and Supreme Leader Snoke toys in those same bargain bins now. So it's like poetry. It sort of rhymes. Each stanza sort of rhymes with the last. It's funny how history literally repeats itself, as George Lucas unintentionally predicted.
Also, the latest batch of toys, the ones for Rise of Skywalker, just look bad.
I didn't even bother looking at those. Again, I'm assuming they did not sell at all.
They're sculpted in like a bit more of like a cartoony style, and like Star Wars toys have always been pretty movie accurate. So it was like really upsetting. Like, I see them in the store and I'm like, this isn't right. And like I think about, like, they might not have sold very well at the time, but those prequel toys were like very well sculpted, and like the packaging was great. So it's
on the opposite end with Star Trek. It was so hilarious looking at how, like, the original Star Trek toys pretty much had nothing to do with Star Trek.
Yeah, Star Wars has nothing to complain about as far as toys go.
Yeah. And it's like Star Trek and the pro wrestling toys. It was so interesting seeing, like, these are two brands, or not. Well, I guess these are like two genre of toys that were constantly switching from toy manufacturer to toy manufacturer. It wasn't like Transformers, where it was made solely by Hasbro, or Hello Kitty, which was made solely by Sanrio. Like, these are things that were done by numerous people were getting their hands on it. And so it was interesting looking at the slow progression of quality from toy line to toy line. And
it was kind of hard to follow the plot in the professional wrestling episode. I'm not going to lie, and it's the last episode of the series so far, so that's a problem, because they kept switching back. Like, most of the episodes, it's like there's a company, and that company produces the toys. But that one, it was like, then the license went to these guys, and then it went over here, and then it went over there.
It's not just like WWF. Like, it was also like AWA, and then like WCW, and then WWF bought WAW and WCW, and then there was like ECW, and then like WWF purchased WCW and ECW, and it turned into WWE. And it's like, I can't follow any of this shit.
Yeah, I'm not a big wrestling guy. I've watched a little bit over the course of my life. I know a little bit about it,
Same
but
here, yeah, this is something like for someone like, I don't know, like Andrew or Brayton or any. It's like, it seems like a lot of our friends are like wrestling people, but not me. But
I have a very, very passing knowledge of it.
right, I know
because
I know
because I have because I have family members who are really into it, and I'm just not on that same page.
It's like I know the Hulkster, I know the Macho Man, I know Andre the Giant.
Man.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
There's not enough macho in this mere episode for professional wrestling.
You should see some of the new wrestling shows though, because there's no audience and it is embarrassing.
Oh, no.
Because of the whole pandemic thing. They've been filming with no audience. Yeah. I watched part of the first. They split WrestleMania up into 2 parts this year, and I saw the first part because I was at my dad's house when it aired, and it was embarrassingly bad.
Oh boy.
They kept like taunting and like doing like gestures to the audience, and I'm like, there's nobody there. It's crickets. You know, I never realized just how much you need like the audience there going like rah! To like generate all that excitement.
Yeah.
Because when they're not there, it's just, you know, it kind of sounds like you're watching like a tennis match. Like, it's just a whole lot of like,
Also, it's like it's funny because they mentioned at the beginning of that episode how wrestling used to be like really boring when it was just like straight, like vanilla professional, like real professional wrestling where it would last like 4 hours or so. It was like, you know, the kind of wrestling. This is why I make a very big difference between how I pronounce wrestling versus wrestling. Wrestling, right? Wrestling.
Because there's wrestling, which is what, you know, they do in high school, and
maybe the Olympics. I don't know.
Is very homoerotic, and then there's wrestling.
Yeah,
which is like,
I was gonna say, not that there's anything wrong with that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's a very big difference between that and wrestling, which is very, very no homo, bro. And like, just you know, it's one is a sport and the other is sports entertainment. That's the major.
Yeah. One last thing. So in the Hello Kitty episode, and I like that they talked about the, you know, the history of like kawaii culture and how that's became socially accepted to embrace the kawaii-ness amongst men and women, but especially women in general. And it was also interesting seeing, like, I knew about this because my sister is into Hello Kitty. But I forgot that she was like a British character and that she was a character that like was meant to sort of, she was like a representation of like the Japan's fascination with like the Western world and how everyone was interested.
I never knew that. That was a big surprise for me. Hello Kitty lives in London. I was like, what?
Like she's the most like Japanese character. Like she's one of the most prolific Japanese character ever, and she's not Japanese.
Yeah. That threw me for a loop. I'm not gonna lie.
It also, it's funny how they talked about like when it came to Hello Kitty in animation, she was given a mouth, and what was it called? Like the mother of Hello Kitty, she's like, no mouth. And even the West, like in America, people are like, why doesn't she have a mouth? But now it's like, oh, it's kind of weird that she has a mouth. And yeah. I went through that exact same mentality growing up with Hello Kitty through my sister.
Yeah. I'll be honest, the Hello Kitty episode was probably my least favorite episode of the series. I slept through part of it. I'm not gonna lie.
I think that was me in pro wrestling, only because it was just so confusing to follow.
But there were some fascinating tidbits of information in there. Like I had no idea that she was supposed to be British, or the fact that she started out as a coin purse.
Yeah, or the fact that she owns a fucking cat, a pet cat. It was a goofy Pluto situation there, and I'm glad they made that comparison.
Yeah, that's just slavery, and that's just slavery with extra steps. No, and then what was I about to say?
Also, fucking Paris Hilton was in the Hello Kitty episode. I was like, where the fuck have you been the last 10 years?
Yeah, I didn't even know she was a fan of Hello Kitty, but apparently she can't get enough of it. Yeah, so
it's so weird because like a lot of these, I'm looking at the Wikipedia article to refresh my mind. They do have several of these episodes have special guests, I'm thinking, really? That's your special guest for the Hello Kitty episode?
I guess it's a well-known fact that she's like really into it. I just never knew it before.
I guess so. I don't know. I remember
not that I've
Paris
ever
Hilton. Yeah.
Not that I've ever really followed the career of Paris Hilton. I pretty much knew her for saying that's hot and
Right.
being in
And
that
what
one episode of South Park.
What was that reality show she was part of with her best friend?
I don't even know.
Yeah, it's like she was super big for all you Gen Zs out there who are probably in your teens and barely getting into your 20s in the last 5 years. Paris Hilton used to be a very big she was our generation's Kim Kardashian, essentially.
Yeah, I was about to say. I think she would say that she was the Kim Kardashian of her time. She was the quintessential, and I think this phrase was coined for her. Famous for being famous.
Right, or celebutante? I don't know.
Yeah, I think she had a sex tape. Just like Kim Kardashian. And
yes, she
might
did.
Might have been where it started. I don't know.
Whatever. Let's see. So we're about the hour 15-minute mark. So it's like, is there any other thing? Oh, okay. So
we've talked a lot about the content of the
Yes.
episodes,
right.
Because it's fascinating and fun to talk about. But we should also probably touch on the production side of things.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the sort of. I know that you have some issues with it, and we can talk about that. I really enjoyed the editing of the series. It has this very sort of. Netflix describes it as quirky, and I think that's very apt. It's a very quirky show. It's very entertaining, I think.
Mm-hmm. It definitely takes a very casual approach to its presentation.
Yeah. You had an issue with the way the interviews were structured or something?
Yeah. So one thing I do like is, they often take jabs at the toy line, and I do appreciate that. It's not like one big like jerk-off session when they do admit their failures over the years. Although, again, still trying to have a happy ending for toy lines like Star Wars and G.I. Joe. But, they do admit their faults, and they do mock the toys. They often do these little like robots chicken-esque like little sketches where characters are put into bad situation, embarrassing situation, or terrible situations. They're funny. The one thing I did not like was they edit the interviews in a way where it looked like the interviewees were reacting to each other's comments, and I didn't like that solely because it was so obvious that it's fake. It's like, oh, he's not, like, one guy will say something and the other interviewer would scoff, but I know that scoff was taken out of context and was simply put there to make it look like he was reacting to the other dude's comment. And they do that throughout the entire documentary series, and I just found that to be very artificial, and it always took me out of the of those interviews. It's like, I can tell that's fake, I know that's fake, why are you trying to convince me it's anything but fake?
Yeah, and I totally get that. I totally see where you're coming from. It just didn't bother me personally. So I think this is one of those things where your mileage may vary.
It's another thing that I've noticed in trailers, especially with comedies, where one character does this thing or says this one thing, and then they'll splice in a shot from a completely different scene where a character is seemingly reacting to the thing that was said or done in the previous shot. I hate trailers like that. Because again,
sure. You also see this done.
Yeah.
You also see this done in films sometimes. Somebody will say something like, "What could possibly go wrong?" Smash cut to it going wrong, or like, a character will ask a question to another character, and then cut to a different scene of a different character answering that question, but to somebody else. I've seen that sort of thing done in before.
But yeah, at least there's some like relationship there where it's like if the person wants to ask a question and the next scene, no, that he's saying no to that question.
Right.
But in like a movie trailer, someone trips and falls, and then you smash cut to a person face palming themselves as if he's embarrassed of the person who just fall. But that's clearly not the case. Those two shots are completely divorced from each other in the actual movie, and that's
like reaction shots. Shots, like in the trailers for say you have a trailer for a movie like Tiptoes, right? And they'll be like, "But she didn't know that his family were midgets," and then you'll like get a bunch of like reaction shots of people going like gasping.
That's the thing. They always put like an artificial audience gasp in a lot of these trailers, and I always hear that same stock sound effect. Oh.
Yeah, so I can certainly understand why that sort of quirky editing style might have rubbed you the wrong way in that regard. It didn't bother me, but I certainly see what you're saying. I had a complaint about a certain episode. This isn't even really, and I mentioned this to you once before, and this isn't even really like a ding against the show. It's just a little personal gripe with the Transformers episode. They go through all the trouble of like doing the entire history of the Transformers franchise, and they just completely skip over the early 2000s. They didn't mention Armada. They didn't mention. Well, I mean, I don't give a fuck about Energon or Cybertron, but mention Armada.
They also didn't. They also failed to bring up any of the Japanese shows. I think they didn't talk about Headmasters, Super God Master Force, Victory, Beast Wars the Second, Beast Wars Neo, any of that shit.
Yeah, they skipped from like Beast Wars to
the live action movies. Yeah,
Michael Bay. Yeah, they skipped a whole lot of stuff. And I get it. It's like a 45-minute show, and they had a lot of history to get through. I understand that. But I don't know. You know, the He-Man episode and the Ninja Turtles episode at least gave, like, a one-sentence nod to the early 2000s versions, you know?
So I also noticed, like, they failed to talk about any of the G.I. Joe stuff post the 80s. Like, they didn't talk about, like, G.I. I think... Did they talk about G.I. Joe's Extreme from the 90s? But... I could have sworn there were, like, in the 2000s, there were still new G.I. Joe toys being made that they did not talk about at all.
Yeah, I don't remember if they talked about G.I. Joe Extreme or not, but, yeah, because I remember in the early to mid-2000s, they kept trying. They tried several times.
They tried so hard, yeah. And that, I think I already mentioned this earlier in this episode, but it's like, it's funny how they acknowledge that He-Man is no longer a thing that's popular with the kids these days, and yet they fail to acknowledge that for G.I. Joe. Although, it's funny because with He-Man, they acknowledge that they're still making new toys aimed solely at the original fans, making like modernized toys and retro-style He-Man toys, and yet Hasbro isn't even doing that at all with G.I. Joe. They don't give a fuck about G.I. Joe these days.
I think they've just failed with G.I. Joe too many times, and they need to give it a break.
It's also possible that just Army toys are... It's like, they mentioned, like, back in the day when the original G.I. Joe figures from, like, the 60s or 70s got, you know, fell in popularity just because it was, like, kind of the 70s. It was, like, the Vietnam era time, or the 60s, 70s Vietnam era, you know, anti-Army thing.
It's important to notice that both times that G.I. Joe has been popular, you know, initially in the 60s and then again in the 80s, it's been times when... the military has been well looked upon by the general public.
Right, and given everything that's occurred in the 2000s, it's like maybe that sort of thing was another thing that was happening in our culture.
The Afghanistan war maybe wasn't the best time.
The war in Iraq and all that other stuff.
To attempt a G.I. Joe rebirth, you know, maybe if they had struck while the iron was hot and brought out a G.I. Joe movie like right after 9/11, they could have made some serious bank. It would have been like the non-ironic Team America. But but by the time they were trying to pull it off, I think the public opinion had already soured on that whole ordeal. But,
most likely. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. Some episodes could have delved deeper into more of like the current history, but I guess it's because most of this was based on nostalgia, or just like they want to focus more on the origins of these toys, more so than the 2000s and 2010s history, because that's just way too recent. It's still fresh in a lot of people's minds or memories, so
it almost makes me wish that the episodes were an hour long instead of 45 minutes, because with 15 more minutes of runtime, you could fill in a lot more of those details, you know.
That's true, yeah. Maybe that's another reason why. Maybe it's like they were specifically going after like bite-sized chunks of entertainment to make it more bingeable for audiences.
Yeah, I mean, some of these subjects have other documentaries out there that you can search out. You know, like for example, in the case of He-Man, there actually is already a documentary on Netflix that's been on there for a few years now, I think. called Power of Grayskull that goes into much greater detail about the entire history of that property. I don't think anything like that exists for Transformers, at least that I'm aware of, so that's unfortunate.
Right.
You know, little things that pop up with documentaries where often they have to make choices about things to cut, and you are left thinking, how could they not mention that? But you know, I wasn't in the cutting room, so I don't know. I don't know what was left on the floor.
Right. Let's see. So, is there anything else to talk about the toys that made us before we wrap things up?
I don't think so. I think I've said my piece. I think you've said yours. I think we're both fully endorsing this product.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can't wait for, you know, the eventual season 4 and the future. You know, I never thought I'd be that interested in the toys that were a big part of my childhood and other people's childhoods and became big staples of pop culture. But yeah, I'd be interested in seeing what else this documentary series has to offer.
Yeah, I have to wonder what they're going to do in the 4th season, because they've covered most of the big ones.
Yeah, so I'm going to put my money on Ghostbusters.
Are there a lot of Ghostbusters toys though?
I remember the AVGN's video showing off his Ghostbusters toys, so maybe.
Okay. I don't think I ever saw that video, so maybe this is a whole world that I wasn't aware of. I know that there's
unless they start doing like obscure toys, like foreign market toys, like, you know, what they've shown off a little bit in Japan that was roughly related to our stuff.
Right. I know when that Ghostbusters Afterlife trailer came out, who knows whenever the fuck we'll get that movie, people were freaking out about the gunner seat on the Ecto-1 because apparently that's from an old toy, so...
I see, then.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
We should do a spin-off of the show about nostalgic video games, too. I feel like that would...
the games that made us. I can totally see that happening. You know, an episode on Super Mario Brothers, an episode on I don't know, on Halo, an episode on Sonic the Hedgehog.
Episode 1, Pong.
Yeah!
The Mortal Kombat episode would be amazing.
Oh, totally, yeah. There's a lot of, you know, behind-the-scenes stuff, everything involving the invention of the ESRB. There's a ton of material there for a documentary.
Definitely. So yeah, that was the toy that made us. We both fully endorsed it. Andres, do you want to jump into your recommendation for next week?
Absolutely. Now, this is going to be something that... yeah.
Or 2 weeks from now. I always say next week, but we don't record this every week.
Right.
It's a problem.
So this is a series that everyone and their mother has already talked about. So, you know, in good old Sons of Serizawa fashion, we're going to be super late to the party and talk about Tiger King. It's not... I know it's a show that's not for everyone. A lot of people, you know, can't even stand, like, I don't know, a single episode or 2, or most people give up around 3 episodes in, but there's a reason why it's the most talked about show in America currently, beyond the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic and there's nothing else to watch on Netflix, I guess. But yeah,
other than the toys that made us.
Other than the toys that made us. But yeah, we're going to talk about all 8 episodes of Tiger King. There used to be 7, but an 8th episode was brought on thanks to Joel McHale. And so I've seen through this...
Well, this might be that. This actually might be a good thing that we relate to the party, that we get to include that 8th episode in our discussion.
Because this is an 8th episode where it's like bringing a lot of the quote-unquote side characters back and interviewing them in like an unedited, unfiltered sort of platform to see their reaction to the success of Tiger King. But it's
a lot of reality shows do this kind of an after the final rose type thing from The Bachelor.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about Tiger King. Was it Murder, Madness, and Mayhem? And so right. I've seen through it. It's trash, but it's my kind of trash. And so we're going to see if it's Dylan's kind of trash as well. If he even enjoys trash at all.
I love the dub of Digimon, and many people would say that that's pretty trash. So that's
So tune
We'll
in next time where we're going to discuss Tiger King, Murder, Madness, and Mayhem, and talk about the documentary, the facts it presents, the facts it leaves out, the sort of worlds, the reactions surrounding it, and our essential thoughts on the whole shebang. So tune in next time for that, and take it away, Dylan.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly the way it's been. Diabetes.
And until next time, everybody, take care.